But that was a big lesson for me. And I'm full of admiration for anybody who sets up for themselves and builds a successful company and a successful brand, because it's tough, really tough. And okay, I was being paid lots and lots of money, but I had no time to spend it. So it meant nothing. And I often used to say to people, I'd give up half my salary to just have some free time.
Welcome again to another English episode of the Lebenswege podcast. Today, Tom Kerr is my guest. He is founder and CEO of Thought Research, and his passion is about market research. We are talking about his path and how market research can help us in making well-researched decisions in times of change. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Andrea. How are you? Wie geht's?
Danke, sehr gut. Ich hoffe, dir auch.
Yeah, mir was good.
You are a market researcher through and through. What makes it so fascinating for you?
Oh, gosh, the study of people, the continuous learning, understanding why people do what they do, not simply what they say, but what they actually do in practice, getting to the root of that. It's been a fascinating exploration of people over time.
What is the most interesting thing you found out doing market research?
Oh, good heavens, so much. It's in human nature to try to classify. We do it every time we meet somebody new. Within a very short period of time, we have assessed that individual. And we use past learning. The old neural nets kick in, and when we meet a David, we think of Davids we've met in the past, and we then assume that this new David is going to be like the Davids we've met in the past. And we have to listen in closely to move beyond that, to understand what this new David really is like. So it's classification. I think so much of what we do in life is putting people into boxes and then expecting certain behaviors from them and certain attitudes from them. And if we don't override our biases, then we can be misled as to the true nature of those individuals. And everybody's unique. I mean, I've been into thousands and thousands of households across the land, and every family is entirely different. Every family is fascinating. Every family leads life in a totally different way. They find their own coping strategies, they find their own solutions, and they live life really according to the mix of the individuals within the household. And it's been a privilege to be able to go into all these houses. I mean, I'm answering, or have been answering, business challenges, trying to understand how to motivate people to behave differently often, either to embrace new products or finding out what would make them respond positively to advertising, which is what an awful lot of market research is about. And it's been fascinating to go into those households and uncover the real people, see how their lives are. I'm really touching now on ethnography, I guess, and ethnographic studies, whereby you're really looking closely at the environment that people are living in, the things they surround themselves with, their attitudes to life, and even the products that they have on their shelves, what they buy and why they buy it. That has been, as I say, a privilege to be able to do that in the name of research, in the name of helping businesses move forward.
How come you started your career with market research?
Oh, it was kind of an accident, and I think most people who moved into market research did so really as an accident. I started off in a graduate program with John Menzies, the Scottish Retail Group. And it was the first time they'd ever done this. And it was great. I had a belief at that stage that I wanted to deal with people. And so getting this kickstart with John Menzies was great, because I thought, well, I'll work in shops, I'll be on the front line, I'll be meeting with people, serving people. And I was dealing in the beginning with them with records and with books, two of my fascinations in life. So those are great departments for me to work in. But I quickly discovered that I was more interested in the people than I was in the selling or the retail trade. And I touched on marketing within my degree, and it had kind of stayed with me, but it was the aspect of people that interested me more. Now, you might think, well, why didn't I go down the personnel route? Well, I wasn't interested in personnel as such. I think actually I was more interested in the word marketing than the word personnel, being young and naive, maybe I didn't know any better. But at that stage, I was more interested in the application of understanding of what people do rather than the training of people, I suppose. And over time, I've learned to understand that HR people often aren't the right type of people who work to work with people. I don't know often why they go into that career, because they seem to like the processes, but don't seem to actively utilize the experience to manage people or to help people's. Anyway, that's a whole different story. So anyway, I started off looking at people and marketing, market research, and I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to work in market research? So I talked to a few people, friends of friends, who worked in market research. I was in London by this time, having moved down from Edinburgh where I did my studies. And I talked to people and I thought, I like this notion of market research. So I got the Market Research Society handbook and I wrote letters to the first 50 companies in the Market Research Society handbook. And long story short, I got a job with a company called AGB. So I probably didn't need to write 47 of those letters that I wrote. And that was the start of my career. Now, that company, which was then called AGB, is now part of the mighty Kantar, and actually the major part of Kantar, one of the world's major market research organizations. And back then, it was established and growing rapidly, but it was nothing like the size of the organization that exists now. I thought of it back then as kind of a cottage industry. Nobody knew about market research. No, it was a kind of secret service going on in the background, working to give companies competitive advantage. And we had all the major brands in the country. And it was a fabulous kickstart for me as a career. And yeah, that was it. That's when my love affair with market research started.
And you made quite a career afterwards as well. Can I say that?
Thank you. You can, yes.
And moved up the hierarchy. How was that?
A series of accidents, I think. I had no master plan. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed being on the agency side, living in London, 10 years with Kantar, as it now is. And then I moved into GFK, German company, and had a further 5 years with GFK. So that was my agency life, where I had opportunities to work with a hell of a lot of companies, and I could start to understand the culture of companies, how different companies were, recognize the companies that I'd like to work for and companies that I wouldn't like to work for. And I was then approached by Bank of Scotland, and they had a great culture. It was a great bank. They were recognized as having the best management team in banking in Britain at the time. And they pursued me, and it happened to coincide with the birth of my son. So I thought, why not? I returned to Edinburgh, moved client side. They invited me to be part of a new strategic analysis unit. They identified 6 individuals from across Britain that they wanted to employ to create this new initiative, which is actually all to do with managing and utilizing data, including market research and insight. So it was very advanced thinking at the time. I was intrigued by what they were doing. So they gave me a senior position. I loved the bank. I thought it was a fabulous environment where it was all the best things of banking, where people cared about the bank and people cared about customers, and everything was done right. They did the right thing and they did it properly. And it was a great period in my career. And they kept giving me more responsibility and kept giving me more responsibility until I ended up as a director of customer, which was, I say, not part of a master plan. I must have been doing something right, and they just kept on giving me more to do. But along that journey, I was asked to have a look at whether there was an opportunity for retail banking in the country. Now, retail banking is established in terms of supermarkets. Sainsbury's, Tesco, and Asda have on and off looked at banking. M&S have it, John Lewis have it. But at that time, Bank of Scotland didn't know if this was going to be a good idea. So they charged me and this other lady, this incredibly dynamic individual called Karen Ingalls, to write a business case and recommend the route forward. So we did the scenario planning. We looked at all the supermarkets. We looked at their market share. And Bank of Scotland was predominantly a Scottish bank, operating almost exclusively in Scotland. And at that time, Sainsbury's were the market leader, but didn't really operate in Scotland, only operated in England. So we thought market leader, cultural fit, absolutely spot on, an inroad to the English market, and no danger of cannibalizing our own market in Scotland. So we wrote the paper, recommended to the board that they team up with Sainsbury's and launch Sainsbury's Bank, and that's what happened. Sainsbury's Bank was rolled out over time. And that's when my next step happened, because having been instrumental in creating this new entity, I was then invited to come on board at Sainsbury's as an exec director responsible for customer. So that was me launched into senior exec position within a major bank as it became, which was testing. And again, it was excellent. They approached me, they asked me if I'd like to do it. And I thought, I guess if there's anything that's true about my career, I've had a lot of good fortune, been in the right place at the right time, and I've been approached and I've reacted. I haven't been proactive. I haven't gone seeking, but yeah, I've been the recipient of what would I guess on the surface appear like favors. Tom, we need you to come and run this department. Will you do it? Okay, I didn't really. I kind of I don't dwell too much on things like that. If a thing feels right, then I'll do it. So that's the way it's gone.
Listening to you, it sounds like, okay, I had big luck. It doesn't have anything to do with me that I got this huge position.
Yeah, I think with every successful person, there's always luck involved, but there is ability. And the thing is, none of us know what it is really that we do well. So that's for other people to assess. We do what we do, and people actually either value it or they don't. And having been trained in the agency world with a fabulous training in the agency world, very enlightened training. When I moved to Bank of Scotland, I was how many years? 5 years ahead of the curve in terms of the developments at the bank. And the bank was immensely well run and a really quite conservative organization. The agency, with all agencies, was really dynamic, really fast moving, really up with the times, embracing all new thinking. And so when I went to the bank, I was coming in with new ways of doing things, new thinking, approaches that they liked. And it just happened to tally with the fact that they felt they wanted to utilize data and information better. So some very smart thinking at the bank and some very fortunate timing for me, but as you quite rightly say, I had a lot of experience and expertise in the area that they wanted to develop. And as a measure of how advanced they were as well, one of the questions they gave me to address was, again from the exec team, was to come up with a new form of money transmission. And I remember at the time being quite flummoxed, thinking, that's not research, that's research and development. That's a much bigger ask. And it was only years later I realized that what they were really seeking was digital banking, but they didn't know it, and nor did I. And at that time, the internet wasn't being used in the way it is now. There was no thought of digital banking. Banks were really branches, and telephony was kind of there. But no, there was no concept of digital banking. So with hindsight, I think, well, that's a bit silly of me not to see that's what was needed. But it was too early. We weren't utilizing technology in that way at all. But as a measure of how forward thinking that organization was, that was a remarkable question to come from a senior, member of the senior team. So wonderful culture. And again, I was just so lucky to be, well, no, that wasn't luck. They recruited me not only on skills and experience, but also on cultural fit. And that was smart, because that is the most important thing. You employ on culture. You have to be true to the culture of an organization.
Are you an early adopter when it comes to changes?
I am. I don't need the reassurance of brands. I know what I'm looking for. I mean, even if it comes to, I'll use an example of, I research everything. I'm a market researcher. So when it comes to hill walking, which I love doing, the Munros in Scotland, fantastic. And I want to have the right equipment for going walking. So I'll research shoes, walking boots, which are the best boots to get. I'll make peer conservative decisions. I mean, Meindl boots out of Germany. I mean, can you do better than that? Absolutely perfect for me. I'll look at waterproof jackets, trying to get what's right. I know the expensive brands, Arc'teryx, if you like. If you do the research, you often uncover brands which aren't so popular, but which are actually, if not better, just as effective. And so I'll quite happily choose a brand that I don't recognize, that's new to the marketplace. I don't need permission from other people around about. It's an interesting thing here in Edinburgh. It's a very conservative environment, and there's new brands come in to Edinburgh, into George Street, which is the designer's street. But the Edinburgh people will never buy a brand that their peers aren't wearing. They need permission to buy a brand. And what they want is a brand that's perceived to be upmarket and perceived to be expensive, but actually isn't as expensive because they don't want to pay that much. So, for instance, when Brooks Brothers came into Edinburgh, great American brand, but the Edinburgh public didn't know Brooks Brothers. And as nobody was wearing Brooks Brothers, the Edinburgh people didn't buy it. Fundamental flaw on the part of Brooks Brothers, they had to establish more of an identity for Brooks on its heritage, which they didn't do in them. You can't just put a store up with Brooks Brothers on it and think the people here are going to buy. So I'm an early adopter, but I'm inner directed as well. So I'm not interested in buying things to demonstrate who I am to other people. That's the outer directed type of individual. I'm much more about how it makes me feel. So it's not about show, which is why brands like John Smedley, for example, are great for people like me, because John Smedley, do you know John Smedley as a brand?
No.
No, never heard of John Smedley. John Smedley is an English clothes manufacturer, and they make particularly good woolen products, handmade in England. They don't put a label on a John Smedley product. So if you buy a John Smedley jumper, there's no outward label. So nobody knows you're wearing a John Smedley jumper, but you do. And it's really high quality. And you buy once because they last a lifetime. And that for people who are inner directed, buying products that are functional, but also make them feel good, that absolutely fits with me. Whereas when you see people walking around with a logo on their chest, often that's a depiction of, I belong to this category, I belong to this group, and I want to be part of your club because you wear that brand as well. And it's a form of belonging, but it's also a form of stating that I'm a little bit better and I'm a bit unique. I've done a hell of a lot of work through the years with professionals, and it always amazes me with professionals when you talk to them about brands, because they dismiss marketing, waste of time. They never stop to think that the greatest products on earth, which become great brands, are the products that they all buy. Coca-Cola is not the world leader because it's the greatest product. It's the world leader because it's been marketed better than any other cola drink in the world. And when I talk to these professionals, they dismiss marketing, waste of time, fluffy people, don't know what they're doing. It's all nonsense. Nobody needs that. And then I'm looking at them thinking, but you're wearing all these brands that have come to your attention because of marketing, and you're using them to show that you belong to your club, whether you're a chartered accountant or a lawyer or a dentist or whatever, and you don't understand how you are being maneuvered in terms of buying. So it is fascinating that often people, irrespective of their position in society, don't understand their own drivers and how companies are influencing them without them fully realizing. Fascinating, isn't it? It's just intriguing.
Yes, I've read somewhere that all the supermarkets are having psychologists working for them, also placing the products right, left, or well, whatever. Just a small example.
Absolutely. I mean, I love merchandising. In Kantar years, that was all packaged groceries. That's fabulous. Placement, number of facings on shelves, all important stuff. I mean, it is a science. I mean, for the journey through a store, every step of it is calculated. Every product is where it needs to be to optimize sales. I remember one fellow, I was doing research for Tesco, and it was a fellow. It wasn't a woman. It was a man, and he said, the thing about Tesco, and the supermarkets bring this, but Tesco is the best. They're so effective at what they do, and they're so efficient that if Tesco controlled the traffic lights on my way to and from the supermarket, they'd all be green. I wouldn't have to stop. And I thought that summed it up for me in a nutshell. The supermarkets became so effective and so efficient that the time from start of journey to end of journey is as short as it can possibly be, but not to the detriment of sales. They're absolutely placing everything where they need to be placed. It's an extraordinary science. And the supermarkets have done more than people realize to improve quality of life in this country. Only a small percentage of our income now is spent on packaged groceries, where you don't have to go back that many decades to find out that it was up to 50% of a household income that was being spent on groceries. Things have changed a lot.
What would you say is the connection between market research and change? Because my listeners, they are looking for life paths or exciting stories and so on. And you already said it's important to know your drivers. What else could we learn from market research?
Yeah, all change comes from research, because the fundamental thing about change is change comes about. I mean, there's innovative change, there's disruptive change in one part, which is something completely different coming along and changing the way that we do things. And everybody always uses the example of when the motor car came along, that was a disruptive change because it took over from the horse and cart. And the horse and cart, well, the cart manufacturers thought, well, we'll design faster carts and then we'll be able to compete with the cars. No, you can't. There's a disruptive change. It's all going to head down that path. But most change is incremental change. Most change is about understanding, identifying what human need is, and particularly an unmet human need. And often we in our heads might think, oh, wouldn't it be good if such and such were true? But we don't do anything more about it, and the thought drifts away. And the challenge with market research is to uncover these wouldn't it be great if moments. And then you can identify needs that people have, which they have perhaps articulated but not dwelt on and not moved forward. And when we talk in market research about looking for an insight is that instance where you hear the expression that sums up a truth or an unmet need. The classic example, it's often used, is Dove. The insight for Dove was women aren't happy with their bodies. And you think, well, okay, so what? That's not a big deal. You hear women saying it all the time. I'm not happy with my body. I'm not happy with my feet. They're too big. You hear supermodels say that. But that was an insight that Dove was able to take and build upon. Women aren't happy with their bodies. So their whole marketing campaign, in fact, the fellow who's responsible for developing Dove at that time is now in charge of Tesco. So he has progressed really very nicely. The whole campaign was built on that one insight, that women aren't happy with their bodies. And suddenly there was a celebration of women's bodies, an acceptance of imperfection. And we moved away from the need to be perfect into a world where being imperfect is perfectly acceptable. And that's a trend that we've seen. And part of the world of market research is about identifying the trends, understanding the national drivers that influence people in the decision making. Clearly, sustainability right now is a major trend. Provenance, where goods come from, is a major trend. Authenticity, we don't want to be hoodwinked. We want to know who's producing the product. We want to know if it's a big company or if it's a small company. And I've just rattled off 3 key trends. I could probably write down about 100, 150 trends that different companies utilize to actually build their proposition to marketplace upon. So you have to understand trends. You have to understand cultural drivers. The German, for example, will be driven by different cultural factors than the Brit. You have to understand the circumstances in which people live. So in the time of a pandemic here, consumer confidence is low, which then in turn means that people don't want to spend. But what they do want to do is to feel good. So you can build upon the need that the public has to feel good, utilize that as a key driver. Don't dwell on the austerity side of things, the negative, that's not going to, we all know what's going on. And and out of that comes the identification of needs, met and unmet needs. And then products, companies adapt their products, build new products, or buy small companies that have a product that's going to fit for that new universal need. And market research is at the heart of all. Market research is like, I mentioned the term earlier on, market research is like a secret service. It's like espionage. It's information finding. It's uncovering the reality of what's going on and then delivering that information to executive teams to make and build decisions. And it's market research that does drive change, because sometimes a company comes along, like BrewDog, for example, classic example of a product that's geared towards innovators. BrewDog was really successful almost by accident. They had a great product. They won a Tesco competition. They got onto the shelves of Tesco, which is really what every company wants to do. And then their sales took off. I could guarantee the young guys who set it up had no idea that they were building upon trends at that moment of arts and crafts, the need for authenticity and provenance. They were rewarding endeavor. Hard work was the new sexy driver, and they wanted newness, but not radical newness. So along comes this arts and crafts type of beer, and it's been enormously successful, built upon people who wanted something different and wanted to feel a bit unique, and that they were discovering Now, as time moves on, it's become an establishment brand. And so those very self-same people who had embraced it immediately are now, of course, looking for something different. And over time, you've mentioned the early adopters. As a company, BrewDog has now moved into the kind of late adopters, which is the mass market. But yeah, they're going to be under threat by the new kids on the block, for whom they're original customers, who they now want to embrace. So yeah, market research is absolutely the heart of it. It influences all aspects of life, because when I've done research for retailers, for banks, for the NHS, so the health services, for charities, for associations, everybody at every company does research, because otherwise you're guessing. You have to know what people want.
Speaking about your career, is there anything you would change now looking back at your career?
What I would say is I firmly believe that in your lifetime, you make decisions at any point in time with all the information available to you. So you can have no regrets. You've got to believe that armed with all the information you had at that time, you made the best decision that you could. It's easy to look back with hindsight and say, well, I guess my example would be when I left an executive position, which is a big step because people don't do that. But I left an exec role to set up for myself because I was a bit disillusioned with the practices I saw going on round about me. It was a time when the credit crunch was about to happen, and it was quite clear that there was malpractice in the banking profession at that time. So I was disillusioned. I decided to pack in a role at the big bank and set up for myself. So it'd be easy for me to look back and say, oh, I should have stuck it out, because I could have then gone from one exec director role to another exec director role and clambered up the slippery pole. But the expression I used at the time was, I had no time. I was working 24/7. I didn't like the environment. I didn't like the experience. And okay, I was being paid lots and lots of money, but I had no time to spend it. So it meant nothing. And I often used to say to people, I'd give up half my salary to just have some free time. And it was that insight for me that nudged me to say, I've got to change. And so it was the right decision at that time. Now I look at it and think, gosh, wouldn't it have been interesting to carry on ascending? But it didn't fit with me as an individual, and I wasn't happy. So it was the right decision. So do I have regrets? I can create potential regrets, but the reality is, as I said, I think you have to believe that each decision you make, armed with all the information you have at that time, and you forget some of that information as you move on in your career, armed with all the information, you make the decision that you believe is the best. So you've got to go with that.
How was the transition time from your exec role to setting up yourself? Was it challenging?
Yeah, yeah, it was. It was. I mean, the thing about in my agency life, I was part of big, giant agencies. In my client side life, I was part of major banks. And when you give that up, you become institutionalized and you don't really realize it. So when I quite casually made the bold step of, I'm going to go, I handed in my notice, linked up with a couple of old colleagues from the agency years, and we set up an agency and we had a plan. But it took me for the first 2 weeks of stopping, it was like a holiday. So that wasn't a problem. And then it was, okay, this holiday's over. This is really strange. What happens next? And I described it as I'd been in an ocean-going liner all my working career. And I knew every aspect of that ocean-going liner. And suddenly I jumped into a dinghy, and the dinghy was connected to the ocean-going liner by a very fine thread. And the ocean-going liner was getting further and further away from me. And I'm in a dinghy with a couple of old colleagues in the middle of a big ocean with nothing on the horizon, thinking, goodness me, what happens next? And this is a bit scary. And then at the scariest point, I think the rope, the thread broke, and suddenly we're just adrift in a dinghy, thinking, oh my God, we've got to get going here. So there was a very difficult initial period, because you think the work's going to come in straight away, but it doesn't. You have to go and find it, which is what we then did. Now, fortunately, I had a lot of contacts in the business world, so I started picking up the phone and started making contact again, and then the business started coming in, and then we got too busy. But being too busy is fine, because you're not then thinking about the what ifs. What if we don't have a good cash flow? What if no business comes in? You suddenly just have to get on and do this stuff. So we'd a very successful few years from there. But it was a difficult. It was difficult to move from the institution to the world of small enterprise, and it's quite a different skill set to be setting up a company. Goodness me! And some people are very well suited to that, and others maybe not so much so. So.
What did you have to learn? What kind of new skills?
I think, although I'd spent an awful lot of my life helping brands identify opportunities, of course, many, many years ago, I remember working with a very small brand in England called Warburton's. And it's when I was at Kantar, and Warburton's was one of my accounts that said, we're going to give you, and I had Unilever, and I had these, Sara Lee, these big, sexy companies, and little Warburton's. And I thought, I don't, little Warburton's, I mean, I'll give me RHM, which was the giant brand in bread at the time. And I met with Jonathan Warburton and Brett Warburton, his brother, and they had ambition and they had a plan, and they did all the right things. They had an advertising agency, a PR agency, research agencies. You need to have those things in place if you're going to try and build a brand. So, but they had a great product. Anyway, long story short, I was able to help them build their strategy and get onto the shelves of Tesco and Sainsbury's. And now Warburton's is a huge organization, and Jonathan still pops up on screen and looks just as, he's a lovely, lovely man, actually. I remember so very well. And he looks just as vibrant now as he did all those years ago. He had a brand and it needed to be developed, but he was really doing that work. And I was able to help him, as many others did. It wasn't only me. I was just a bit player in all this. And he was able to grow his brand and become this huge organization. When I set up for myself with these two partners, we had to build a brand. And I'd never done that from scratch before. And it's really hard to build a brand, to develop the strategy, to do the sales, to do the work, to do everything, even the accounts. And the thing I learned was it takes a particular type of individual to build a brand from scratch. It's one thing to help maintain a brand, and it's another thing to help it adapt or grow, or even helping people understand what their brand stands for. I've done all that kind of work, but actually building a brand from scratch, that's really tough. And so much so that I found that when I was again approached by another organization to join them as a resident expert in insight, I chose to take that step and move away from the brand building. I loved the research and I loved everything, but I was not getting to grips with building the brand, building the company from scratch. That was kind of tough. And the three of us decided that we'd given it a fair crack. The credit crunch had come into being, and we each decided on a safer route, I think, from that point. But that was a big lesson for me. And I'm full of admiration for anybody who sets up for themselves and builds a successful company and a successful brand, because it's tough, really tough.
Talking to you, I feel the market research spirit, and some of my listeners are looking where their spirit is. Do you have any advice or ideas how you can look to find their spirit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe in simplicity. I think you don't have to overcomplicate things. I think if you take a sheet of paper and you create two columns, and in one column, you put down the things that you like doing, and in the other column, you put down the list of things that you don't like doing. And this could be something that I like dealing with people. Maybe that's in the I like doing column. I don't like dealing with numbers. I like being outside. I don't like being inside. It's put down your likes and dislikes and just simply list them. Keep it as simple as that. And then take another piece of paper and put down in one column the things that you're good at. And in the other column, put down the things that you're not good at. And then look to cross those two pages over. So what are the things you're good at, and what does that fit with in terms of the things that you like? Because if the things that you're good at match across the things that you don't like, you're going to have to rethink which direction you're taking. People have to also think about whether they're risk takers or not risk takers. I mean, I've clearly taken risks in my career when I've jumped from the big institution into doing my own thing. Are you happy in taking a risk, or would you rather play safe? Do you want to do a job? Do you want to learn a skill and then repetitively use that skill every day? Or do you want to be a creator? Do you want to create new things? Because if you move into that space of creativity, you have to come up with solutions all the time. And that means you're going to be tested all the time. And that means you're going to be a bit scared a lot of the time and you'll be concerned about, what if I can't find the answer to this challenge? So be very conscious of whether that's the space you want to move in or not. And there's nothing wrong with, chartered accountants learn a skill which they repeat every day. They know what to do and they do it. They don't have the challenge of creating something new that's not in their world. And that's a very nice place to be. And that suits often their personalities and leads to great contentment. But perhaps what it doesn't lead to is the great excitement when you've created something new and you think, I did that. I got over all those obstacles. I surmounted the challenges. I came up with a solution and it works. And you'll have failures, of course you will. But when you look back in your career, you want to think of the things that you achieved, the things you did, the breakthroughs. That's where the real joy of work comes from. So if you create those two lists and then take the next step, for once you've identified your skills and what you like, and you start to focus on professions or directions that you could take, and be proud if you're good with your hands, and you could be, I wish I could be a carpenter. That's always been a desire of mine in life, but I'm completely useless with my hands. If I had skills with my hands, I'd have been a carpenter. I wouldn't have gone to market research. So don't diminish any of your skills or values. Every skill is valuable. They're just all different. Nobody's better than anybody else. And then when you're looking at environments that you want to work in, you've got to look at culture. You've got to look at your values. You've got to look at your drivers. What's important to you? Understand self. And then look at the cultural value sets of companies and think, do those values fit with my values? Is there a cultural fit? Because in agency life, Kantar put me onto accounts that I fitted with culturally. It was so smart. They recognized that I would fit with the Unilever culture, which is about collaboration, teams. It's about the collective doing well. And you'll see Unilever advertising tends to be more about family. It tends to be softer. If they'd put me onto Procter & Gamble, which is a great company, Procter & Gamble is like American PhD hard nose. It does stuff. Their washing powders get stains out. There's nothing soft or family oriented about what they do. It's about effectiveness. I would have floundered in that culture, and I've always have floundered with folks who've come through the Procter & Gamble kind of university, I suppose, because we just approach the world in different ways. And I think every individual has to look at their own cultural values, their own cultural fit, and companies that they would be suitable for. And that's not to say the only route is to go down the company route. But I say, if you're going to set up for yourself, be cognizant of the challenges of creating you the brand, or your company the brand, because you're going to have to beat the competition, because there'll be others who'll be trying to do what you do. You just have to do it better.
Yeah, that's true. So thank you very much, Tom, for allowing me to meet you today.
Well, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Me too. It was great to feel Tom's passion for market research. I think a lot of people are looking for exactly this passion. And another thing that a lot of people experience is that they earn a lot of money, but they don't have time to spend it, and are maybe at the end of the day disillusioned of their job. So it's always worth it to try new things and find out if it's more suitable. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, and I hope you tune in again next time.